Into action. Okay, welcome everyone to today's NTAC session. This is our September Youth and Young Adult Support Space, or our YYASS. And as always, we're just so happy and grateful that you're taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. And before we get started, I just have our regular kind of intro bits to go over. And in the meantime, as I go through those items, we would love for folks to get acquainted in the chat. If you'd like to share your organization, your role, where you're located, anything else you'd like to share about your presence and representation in this space in the chat. Sheila, I already see you got us started. Thank you. But please feel free to continue doing so. And as part of our session, we must provide you with the following disclaimer. So this presentation was prepared by NTAC under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. And while this event is supported by SAMHSA, the contents are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of SAMHSA, HHS, or the US government. And in terms of security in this space, we've been all good so far, fingers crossed, knocking on my wooden desk, right? And while we hope that there are not any security issues that arise today, in the event that any may occur, the session will immediately end and you will be notified by email how to rejoin a new session. Got to give creds where they're due to our incredible national partners that have come together to utilize their expertise and their subject matter knowledge to help inform the field by creating products, resources, and sessions like this one to enhance youth and young adult serving systems. And youth and families, or sorry, and families included as well. And just going a little bit more macro. So as a center, our vision is that all children, youth, and families living with and impacted by mental health experiences will have access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive in a comprehensive and equitable system of care. We serve a wide cross-sector audience, including everyone from state leaders, providers, the school workforce, infant and early childhood providers, community-based providers, peer supports, family partners, youth partners, and much more. And we have all sorts of different offerings, from individual consultation to more in-depth sessions like this one, to peer learning exchanges and tools to support you in your work and greater advocacy efforts. Our aim is to really create those outlets for communication, collaboration, and resource sharing amongst all of us. So please definitely also make sure to check out all of our resources and archived presentations on our website, or go to the Contact Us link there to request consultation or training. I'm breezing through all this to get to the good stuff. I promise y'all. And this is one of them. So for those who attended our last virtual Systems of Care Summit last year, we have another one being planned out now. So if you are interested in getting involved and submitting a proposal, we have the link hyperlinked here, and then Bridget's dropping all the good stuff to continue exploring that in the chat as well. And definitely want to reintroduce myself as your host of this YYASS each month, as well as your facilitator of this session today. So my name is Shayn McDonald. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I am coming to you from the occupied and unceded land of the Nipmuc, Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Penobscot, and many other indigenous peoples, which under settler colonialism is known as Massachusetts. I am a youth program coordinator for Youth Move National and an NTAC partner. And I am also a person of many lived and living experiences and identities. And for the purpose of today's session, I will also share that I am someone who has firsthand lived experience in navigating relationships with ways of being and coping with trauma and what I call mind-body overwhelm as a young adult, including with and I will give a more formal content noting in a note in a moment, but just brief one content-wise for now. I do have first-hand lived experience as a young adult navigating relationships with self-harm, death and dying. I am a multiple attempt survivor, as well as substance use, all of which will be referenced in some way today. So I am definitely personally and professionally grateful to be here and feel honored to explore this conversation with y'all today, especially as a person who honestly really would have benefited from a harm reduction approach to care and support, and experienced a lot of harm in navigating systems and supports without it. So that being said, in transitioning into our specific topic of today, Today, we're going to be exploring harm reduction as a framework for supporting youth and young adults across the systems that seek to serve them. For those who have been a part of these YYASS sessions for the past few months, this will be kind of a shift in reframing in format, where our past sessions have been very much didactic. You know, we bring in someone to discuss a topic and then open up for Q&A and kind of close out. We do want to engage y'all more so within these greater conversations and around these topics shared in these spaces. So do prepare for that. Although we do honor your rights to participate and engage in this space as feels good and true to you across this time together. So within this, we'll kind of go over what harm reduction is generally as a framework, why it's so important to weave in this conversation for youth and young adults specifically. I'm going to introduce one potential model that exists and is tailored specifically for youth to approach harm reduction for young people in this way. And again, we'll welcome your feedback throughout. And one way that we'll be doing that is by using Menti polls. So as we get to each poll, it will be the same link, but for folks who, drop in throughout, I'll continue to drop the link to the poll. And once you open it, after you answer the first poll, if you leave that tab open on your phone, on your tablet, on another window on your screen, you should be able to return to that and have it transition automatically to the second or the next question or poll proposed. So if anybody has any tech struggles, definitely let us know. But otherwise, Menti tends to be fairly friendly and has worked okay in this space so far. So one last note before I offer a starting poll to reflect before I share a little bit more around understanding harm reduction, I do want to give a more formal content note and reminder of self-care. So this session 100% will include references to trauma and other potentially activating topics and experiences. So please do keep that in mind, and please do honor your right to self-care throughout, whether that means going off camera and sharing in the chat more so than on camera, off mute at any point, taking a break from the space and returning back, moving away from the space entirely, right? But while we don't offer like more formal, like direct support if you need it within this space, we do encourage you in this moment too to like ensure that you have those point people in your lives formally or informally that you can lean on if you need that support at any point throughout this session. So with all that being said, and with that promise of making this more engaging throughout, I am going to offer our first Menti poll. So this is a little bit of a temperature gauge before we dive deeper into this conversation, and I am dropping the link in the chat right now. So Bridget, if it's okay with you, I can share the screen itself so that we can kind of go through this in real time. So as folks share their answers, please do sign in like anonymously. It might give you like an anonymous animal or some other username, but definitely can feel free to be anonymous, and even if it might not even ask for a name either, which is a thing too. But if there is any ask for specifics, feel free to use any like fun animal name or color or something to get into the poll. But I believe this is Sharon. Awesome. So this first question again is that sort of just checking in on where you're at and how you're feeling in this moment on this topic. So what comes to mind when considering this topic of harm reduction for youth and young adults? Could be a word, it could be a phrase or a term or a question or a concern, right? Could be kind of like a tagline, anything you'd like to share in this moment, just briefly before we move on. So far, I see substance use, yes, 100%. And that's going to be part of the next kind of overarching review of what we mean by this, because harm reduction absolutely traditionally is more like specifically focused around experiences navigating relationships with substances and substance use. However, it is definitely a broader framework that can be applied across different experiences and in support of young people across different systems even. So I love that. I see say no, that says abstinence model to me, right? Just don't do the thing. But that's I statements, suicide ideation, depression, yep, 100%. Support systems, safer. I love that, especially considering some of the more like less than appreciative of this model kind of sentiments around this not being safe, right? Or centering safety in important ways, right? Clean syringe exchanges as an example. Yeah. Challenging, 100%, especially with this specific demographic we're going to be exploring this with today. Trauma, needing safe spaces, love that need for better and more training education, 100%. And I will say this is not going to be a comprehensive, like grounded macro to micro, how to honor this framework in practice, regardless of the role you're in personally or professionally in support of youth and young adults in your communities. But we'll offer some considerations, some ideas, one potential model, and an opportunity for y'all to kind of explore this a little bit. While also following up, so stay tuned after this session. We'll follow up with kind of like a feedback summary of this session with all the highlights included, as well as links to additional resources to explore this topic further. So definitely stay tuned for that. And for now, I really do appreciate all that was shared so far. And I do see in the chat from JC Youth, and harm reduction is important, impactful, and challenging. 100% agreed, and we'll definitely explore that more. For now, I am moving on to the next. Actually, I'll leave it on this poll so that folks don't get too confused, but I'm stopping my sharing for now if you want to bring the slides back up, Bridget. All right, a little bit of tech finagling here, but we should all be okay. All right. So thank you all so much. Now let's get into like, what is harm reduction, right? So harm reduction is a framework, a lens, a greater approach that focuses on minimizing potential risk and harm, right? Harm reduction, rather than requiring a one-way fits everybody or needs to be the way or is the only right way, like abstinence, right? And this extends beyond substance use. It means meeting people where they are, offering support that respects their self-determined choices and the lived realities they are experiencing and naming and defining, right? And this approach challenges traditional one-way models like abstinence and emphasizes safer alternatives while addressing immediate needs. And that doesn't mean immediate need to prevent a person from having autonomy or agency in their choices and their actions and ways of being in a moment, right? That could mean things that could be informing why they are engaging with these practices, behaviors, right? Coping skills in the ways that they are, right? And in that, and always honoring self-determination of youth across systems in this way. This model also pushes for accountability and addressing larger systemic barriers and oppressive narratives that, again, contribute to why young people might be engaging with more like risky or life jeopardizing ways of coping, right? And ultimately reduces shame and alienation for folks who really find value and benefit in the practices that they engage with, these relationships that they hold, and the ways in which they name and define their lived experiences and realities. And finally, it expands awareness to be more intersectionally responsive and supportive, honoring that like the human experience very much is subjective in that only we are the ones living our specific realities in our bodies, right? So in that we have to honor what that means and how that could look and be defined and explained for and by every unique individual person, right? And harm reduction also honors and aligns with many other really important frameworks that are I think becoming more popular in conversation in this sphere, right? So harm reduction is so much more than just reducing harm, right? It truly is a paradigm shift in how we approach support and healing in communities and within systems alike, right? It's trauma informed, meaning that we consider the full context of someone's experiences, including those larger systemic and intersectional factors. And we always explore the why, right, behind their journey and where they are right now in their words. It's also healing centered. Folks might see the phrase healing centered harm reduction, right? Definitely a piece of this. So recognizing that discovering our authentic selves is part of the process, right? Harm reduction is also restorative, honoring individual and collective responsibility for addressing harm, and ultimately transformative too, in service of transformative justice, really shifting the way we approach care and support, and even our greater ideas around how we understand and define health and wellness on every level, from individual to interpersonal, to communities, to systems, to society, to even the world at large, right? So this is a big shift and it takes a lot. And it's not a matter of attending one training or joining this one conversation, right? So this is definitely part of a greater call to action to continue this conversation. Because it is particularly important and less of a maybe easy conversation, although this is generally a difficult one to have, right, for youth and young adults. So while it is challenging to advocate for across various systems and communities alike, and requires a significant and transformative paradigm shift or shift in thinking and perceiving and understanding people, places, and things, right? It is incredibly important and essential to supporting youth in the ways that we aim to, right? Harm reduction is not just, again, about avoiding like negative consequences of the relationships that we build and the ways that we cope, and also not just about avoiding punitive or punishing or agency power removing measures that can typically take place within traditional efforts to approach young people experiencing these more intensive things, right? It's really about respecting individual choices and regularly checking in with ourselves to ensure that we're not imposing our own values or expectations on those that we aim to support. It means deconstructing, right, the oppressive narratives and systems that contribute to why individuals might be coping in the ways that they're often condemned for, or struggling in the ways that they self-identify with, right? This approach fosters a culture of compassion and support where people are encouraged to make informed choices about their well-being in ways that feel good and true to them, right? And unlike traditional recovery models, which often enforce that one-size-fits-all approach, right? Harm reduction refines recovery, or however a person names and describes that journey of I've been saying uncovery, recovery, discovery for themselves, right? As well as taking a harm reduction approach to support shouldn't solely be about this absence of certain behaviors that are more concerning or, kind of require that like mandated reporting, right? Instead, it should really focus on developing ways of being and coping that align with one's goals and inner truths in service of reducing that harm, right? So I'm going to try to keep this brief too and highlighting this example because I did link the website that goes into it more in depth. And we're not going to explore this super in depth, although I did want to offer one more like tangible resource approaching harm reduction specifically for youth and young adults in a way that you can replicate in a more like on the ground level, right? As opposed to sort of dancing in philosophy like I like to do all the time. So just offering this model of the 7 challenges, which someone in our Greater Intech Networks actually shared with me, which was awesome. Never had heard of it before. But this is specifically designed to support youth and young adults as they navigate their relationships with substance use. More specifically, however, like harm reduction, right, can apply across other ways of being and coping as well. So this is a more like practical approach to honoring these harm reduction principles with youth and young adults, specifically, which again, as I noted, can be a challenge. Honors, centers, offers a whole lot in alignment with what I just shared around core values around harm reduction. And just a brief spotlight specifically to those 7 challenges. I did reword them just slightly differently, just to be a little bit more broad in service of honoring ways of being and coping in addition to substance use. But on this next slide, we have like the actual 7 challenges, right? The first is really deciding to open up and share honestly about ourselves and our experiences, which requires a lot, right? Creating that space where folks feel safe to do so, and taking that step as a young person going through a really hard thing, yourself to really open up about that. Next, we reflect on what we appreciate about these experiences, considering how they serve us and why we continue to engage with them, because that is a piece of the conversation that's often lost in traditional approaches to supporting youth and having these conversations, right? We then need to consider, of course, how these experiences may have caused harm, either to ourselves as the person, with these relationships or ways of being and coping, as well as others, and think about the potential negative impacts, right? We need to recognize our own responsibility and the role of others within our situations, right? This includes reflecting on our own accountability and advocating for greater change to reduce barriers and those oppressive forces that deny youth the ability to really heal, live, and thrive. We explore all the realities of the current situation, right? Depending on what folks are forming these relationships with, and the coping skills that they're using could be facing some punitive barriers or consequences if they continue with what they're doing, right? But it's also important to acknowledge and envision where we're going, where we want to go, and what it takes to get there, right? We make thoughtful decisions about our lives, those coping strategies and relationships, right? Aligning our choices with our personal goals and values. So bringing that self-determination back as well, right? And then finally, like following through on our decisions and keeping this as a sort of reflexive loop of constantly returning to previous challenges to continue like reflecting, expanding, building upon them in service of continuing always towards those greater goals. So again, this is just like one way of approaching this. And I definitely encourage y'all to keep these challenges in mind as we move into this last breakout activity, which is what I was rushing to get to because I'm really excited about it. But before we do that, I do have one additional smaller poll before we get there. And this is a tricky question, right? So I'm definitely curious what y'all's thoughts are on it. And I believe that I just made it real and answerable. Let me share it. All right, so, and this is difficult, right? What challenges come to mind when considering harm reduction with youth under the age of consent for services? So these are folks that wouldn't necessarily have the same level of granted autonomy or self-determination as folks like over the age of consent, right? Like 18 or older considered like legal adults, although in that like youth and young adult age bracket, right? And noting that like this is kind of usually what we get to in this conversation of honoring this framework with younger folks, right? Is this, well, if they're under a particular age, can we even honor this in the same way? Is it important to not, right? Ooh, see, parents not in agreement with philosophy of harm reduction, 100%. Legal guardian parents, yeah. So absolutely, it's not just about like folks that we work with and potential funders and even like SAMHSA, right? Where we need to kind of like get this buy-in, quote unquote, on a larger level, right? But folks in community, 100%. It's the awareness, ability to self-reflect, to understand the severity. That is interesting, I think, across all parties involved in this conversation. Young person's environment, overcome the stigma and parent concerns, make sure they understand the terms, right? Something I like to say always when supporting youth and young adults is, you know, where we can't honor mutuality, like more so in peer support conversations, but where we can't honor mutuality, right? Honor transparency, especially in those like initial conversations of getting to know someone, or if they're seeking support and you feel like it's gearing more towards a potential like mandated moment, right? And you know you have to breach that confidentiality, right? Regardless of your role, really honoring intention on naming that, and as much as possible, like clarifying where confidentiality can be honored and not across whatever roles you're in personally, professionally, in the lives of young people that you care about, right? The fear to express their experiences so they choose to keep quiet, I think is something that would be less of a likelihood if harm reduction were more of an approach taken within these systems as well. Because I think, at least for me, I definitely was hiding what I was going through. One, because I was worried about being a burden, because that's a narrative out there too. You can't struggle because then you're a problem to fix or deal with, right? And then also just fear of, I saw what happens if you say the buzzword, right? Suddenly I get locked away somewhere and I don't know how long I'm going to be there or what that looks like. And then it's just another add-on to the happening that I feel like I'm currently am going through, right? So really appreciate all these sentiments. And without further ado, do you want to introduce our last breakout activity with a lot of intention to preface. So for our final activity, this will be in breakout groups, and we have a group in total of 26, and I think without co-facilitators, maybe it'll be like 23, right? So not too large of a group. That being said, I don't know if we'll have time for formal, like, you know, debriefs and share outs from each group when we come back together after breakouts, just for time. But as much as we can, offering folks an opportunity to unmute and come on stage, if you will, to share verbally. Otherwise, I do have a couple other additional polls that I didn't have slides for to add responses to this. So kind of bringing it back, right? We're going to be breaking y'all out into groups of, I'm thinking with this smaller group, maybe 3 to 4. We could do 4 to 5. I'll leave you to make that decision, Bridget. But we're going to ask you to, in your breakout groups, discuss how to, or try to, apply harm reduction principles in practice. So each group will focus on one of the 2 real-world scenarios that I've offered that youth may face in different systems and likely are definitely things that speak to my own firsthand lived experience. And your task is to consider how to approach their needs through this lens of harm reduction. So definitely use these questions to guide your conversations, which I will drop in the chat to follow you as well. And please do also consider what we just went over for those 7 challenges, if that helps for some inspiration. But please, for the scenario that you're assigned, and I'll go over which one you're going to be taking in a moment. Please reflect on the following, right? How could a harm reduction approach better support the young person in your scenario? What kinds of non-punitive or punishing or power removing, healing-centered resources or supports could be offered that honor the young person's self-determination? No worries, Arturo, I appreciate you. And send in love and energy. And what challenges do you anticipate, right? Could be similar things that were just shared on the poll, right? But specific to the situation, what comes up for you? And if we were to dream an ideal world, with all things working out in service of honoring this harm reduction approach, how might we consider navigating those challenges, right? And then finally, just a catch-all for any unique insights or creative ideas that may have surfaced. So again, while we won't necessarily be able to offer y'all space to more comprehensively report out your highlights from your discussions for each group in breakouts, we will have 2 different Menti polls for each scenario to kind of capture those highlights too. So please do take notes of your highlights across these situations and your responses to these questions if you're following them more directly. And please note those in a way that you can kind of copy and paste in that Menti poll. If not, have an opportunity to share unmuted if we have some time. And not too many folks are jumping in for that virtual mic. So with that being said, I will give just like a hot second for folks. If you have any additional resources, programs, upcoming opportunities, links to things for folks to be aware of or get involved with or explore further, or sign up for, right? Either on this topic of harm reduction for youth and young adults, or in general for right here, right now. And otherwise, I'm going to drop something that I have in service of that in the chat. And I didn't get to this poll, but there is one if you are able to access all parts of this kind of Menti poll through that link. There is a catch-all for what's one tangible action item that you'll take to honor this conversation or move it forward. So please do respond to that if you're able, or if you have thoughts, please feel free to email me. But otherwise, your feedback is definitely important to us. So please fill out this, the feedback survey as you're able. And please do stay connected with us. And please join us next time for our YYASS. And one more little plug for submitting proposals for our SOC Summit. And otherwise, whew, this was an hour, but it was a really good one, and I really appreciate being a part of it. So thank y'all so much. I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time for our October YYASS. So stay tuned until then, folks. Thank you.